3 weeks before my 41st birthday, while my husband Nathan Cole was attending a real estate convention in Denver. I stopped at a tiny roadside market outside Bellwether, Pennsylvania, intending to buy milk and batteries, but a handwritten sign beside the register advertising a special state jackpot caught my attention. And because Nathan had spent 12 years treating every unexpected dollar in my hands as though it belonged under his supervision, I quietly bought a single $3 ticket with cash from the tips I earned helping an elderly neighbor with her accounts, slipped it inside an old cookbook when I got home, and thought nothing more about it until 2 nights later when my teenage daughter Sophie was asleep upstairs and I noticed the winning numbers scrolling across the television while I was folding laundry. I checked the ticket against the numbers once, then again, and finally carried it into the bathroom, locked the door, and checked it on the state lottery app with trembling fingers, because every number matched except the bonus number that appeared beside the jackpot amount of $61 8 million. And for several minutes I sat on the closed toilet lid, staring at the screen, while my mind raced through everything except celebration. Nathan's weekly lectures about waste, the separate bank account he had insisted I close years earlier, the passwords he kept written in a notebook I was never supposed to touch. The way he called my part time accounting work a hobby, even though my income had quietly paid for groceries and school expenses, and the terrible realization that winning the money might not be an escape at all if I made the wrong decision first. Nathan had never struck me, never shouted in public, and never given anyone a dramatic reason to suspect him, which was precisely why it had taken me so long to understand that a person could build a prison without ever touching a lock. Because he chose our investments, questioned every purchase, decided which relatives deserved help, complained when I bought a $12 sweater without consulting him, and once made me return a birthday necklace my sister had given me because he said expensive gifts created unnecessary expectations. So when I looked at that lottery ticket, I did not see luxury cars or mansions. I saw a door, and before opening it, I decided I needed to know whether the man standing on the other side of my marriage was still someone I could trust. The next morning, instead of calling Nathan or telling my sister, I contacted a quiet attorney named Evelyn Hart who specialized in complex family finances. And during our first meeting in a converted library above a bakery, I placed the ticket on her desk and told her the entire truth, including the fact that the money used to buy it had come from my own small earnings. And Evelyn listened carefully before saying, Mara, the most dangerous thing you can do right now is behave like a woman who has suddenly become rich. Because if your marriage is already unstable, this money will magnify every weakness that was hiding underneath it, after which she instructed me to secure the original ticket, document every account, make no promises to Nathan, avoid transferring money impulsively, and most importantly, determine whether I wanted to save my marriage before deciding what I wanted to do with the fortune. For the next month, I lived two lives, because during the day I packed Nathan's lunches, helped Sophie prepare for her science competition, answered clients' bookkeeping questions, and smiled across the dinner table while my husband talked about a promotion he expected to receive. While at night I met Evelyn, gathered financial records, opened legitimate accounts under professional guidance, and slowly discovered how much of our supposed financial security was actually controlled by Nathan. But the real turning point came when Evelyn uncovered a pattern of withdrawals from a business account that Nathan had always described as untouchable, and after tracing the transfers, she found that more than $180,000 had been moved over several years to an apartment in Denver, rented under a company connected to one of his colleagues. I confronted no one that evening because I had finally learned the difference between reacting and preparing. And 2 days later, I found the second piece of the puzzle almost by accident when Sophie asked me to print a school form from Nathan's laptop while he was outside repairing the sprinkler system, and the computer opened to an email thread with a woman named Elise Warren, in which Nathan discussed leaving our marriage after the right financial opportunity, complained that I was becoming too dependent, and casually mentioned that he expected me to receive nothing substantial if we separated. So I photographed the messages, closed the computer, and sat alone in the laundry room listening to the washing machine spin, while something inside me went completely still, because I finally understood that the lottery had not created the crisis in my marriage. It had simply illuminated one that had already been there. When Nathan returned from his trip to Denver, he noticed immediately that something about me had changed, although he could not identify it. And during dinner, he studied me over the rim of his glass before asking, Why are you looking at me like that? To which I calmly replied, I'm not sure I ever really looked at you before. And the silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the refrigerator humming in the next rooms. But I still did not reveal the ticket because Evelyn had helped me understand that truth did not require immediate disclosure when someone had spent years using information as a weapon. 3 days later, Nathan received a letter from Evelyn requesting financial documentation for an independent review, and his reaction was immediate: first irritation, then disbelief, then the familiar controlled tone he used whenever he wanted me to feel unreasonable, as he demanded to know why I suddenly needed an attorney and warned me that destroying a family over money would hurt Sophie. But I looked at him across the kitchen where he had once reviewed my grocery receipts line by line and said, "This isn't about money, Nathan." And that's exactly what you still don't understand. Before informing him that I had decided to separate and that all further financial discussions would go through our attorneys. The following weeks became a storm of legal meetings, whispered conversations, and uncomfortable discoveries. And Nathan's confidence collapsed when he realized the financial records he had controlled for years could be examined by someone outside the marriage. Because Evelyn traced the Denver transfers, identified accounts I had never known existed, and documented a pattern of decisions that made his earlier claims about being the sole provider look very different under professional scrutiny. While I moved temporarily with Sophie into my sister Claire's farmhouse 2 counties away, where the morning smelled of wet grass and coffee, and nobody cared whether I bought a sandwich without explaining the receipt. Nathan tried everything he knew, from promising counseling and sending flowers to accusing me of betrayal and suggesting that I had somehow manipulated the lottery itself. But the strangest moment came when he finally said, "If you had just told me about the money, we could have built something incredible together." And I answered, "That's the problem, Nathan, because for 12 years you called everything we built yours, and now you want to call everything I won ours." After which he had nothing to say, while Evelyn negotiated a settlement that protected the legitimate assets I was entitled to keep, required Nathan to account for the hidden transfers, and ensured that Sophie would never become a bargaining chip between us. On the morning the divorce agreement was finalized, I drove alone to the courthouse in a 10-year-old blue sedan because I wanted one ordinary thing to remain ordinary. And after signing the final documents, I stood on the courthouse steps beneath a pale spring sky and realized I had spent so much time imagining freedom as a number in a bank account that I had forgotten what freedom actually felt like. Choosing where to live, choosing how to spend an afternoon, choosing whether to work, choosing what kind of mother I wanted to be, and choosing people who could disagree with me without making me afraid. I eventually used a carefully managed portion of the winnings to purchase a modest lakeside property outside Willowmere, started a scholarship fund for local students who wanted to study accounting and business, expanded my bookkeeping practice into a small financial services firm, and created a college account for Sophie. But I never bought the mansion Nathan once assumed I would buy, because the greatest luxury I discovered was not marble floors or private jets. It was waking up without someone auditing my existence, and years later, whenever I passed that little market in Bellwether, I remember the woman who walked in carrying $3 and walked out with a ticket, unaware that the real prize would not be the millions at all, but the courage to stop living a life in which she had to ask permission to become herself. Sophie is 17 now, tall, outspoken, endlessly curious, and still keeps the first sketch she ever made of our farmhouse above her desk, while Nathan and I communicate only about her. And although I no longer spend time wondering whether he regrets losing me, I sometimes think about the woman I was before that lottery ticket and wish I could sit beside her at the kitchen table, take her hand, and tell her that she is not weak for being afraid, that she is not selfish for wanting a life of her own, and that sometimes the most important decision is not what you do after receiving a miracle, but whether you have the courage to recognize the truth that miracle reveals. If you had been standing where I stood with $61, 8 million waiting behind a locked door, a marriage already cracking beneath the surface, and a child watching everything you did, would you have told your spouse immediately, protected the money first, or chosen a completely different path? And whatever your answer, I hope you remember that money can solve problems, create problems, or simply expose them. But the most valuable thing any person can ever gain is the freedom to make honest choices without surrendering their identity to someone else's control. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.